Darroch is not only our former man in Washington, as a UK ambassador to Washington for many years, he was also a former national security advisor to David Cameron when he was Prime Minister. Good morning to you, Lord Darroch.
Good morning, Julia.
Thank you so much for joining us. Well, we had these two statements yesterday from the two men we really hadn't heard from since Saturday, since the sort of 24 hours of that attempted coup that we're now told wasn't. First, we heard from Yevgeny Prigozhin, an 11-minute audio message on Telegram defending the march, said he'd highlighted security concerns, saying basically it was triggered by a Russian army attack on Wagner Group base in eastern Ukraine. He pointing out that actually, you know, it showed that he could have seized Ukraine in a day. Then we had Vladimir Putin doing a video address from the Kremlin. He hadn't been seen since Saturday morning. So he said, well, he denounced rebel leaders, but he urged forgiveness, as I say, for the patriots, he said, the mercenaries who fought in Ukraine. But he vowed to punish the leadership without naming Prigozhin himself. But he'd also talked about how that the West and these rebels had wanted to the Russia to choke in bloody civil strife, and insisted that any blackmail is doomed to failure. What did you make of what both those men had to say, and what can we read into that?
Julia, as Benedict has just said, this is extraordinarily complicated, and there's an awful lot that we can't know about what is really going on behind the scenes. Putin's his statement yesterday evening, I mean, was in itself a bit of a sign of weakness, because it was a pre-record. He wasn't exactly in a press conference, was he? And it was quite short. But it seemed to me an attempt to show a harder line, to look a bit tougher than that deal 48 hours earlier, where Prigozhin was allowed to go into exile in Ukraine, and there didn't seem to be any particular sanctions against him. So Putin's toughened up his line. But again, as Benedict said, this whole episode has done two things. One, it has made Putin look weak, not the strong man that he wants to be seen as. And second, it shows that under the surface, there is a lot of turmoil and really quite a lot of opposition, both in the army and also, I think, in the Russian general public, to the war, to how it's being prosecuted, but perhaps also to its happening at all. Remember when the Wagner forces were in Rostov before they set off Moscow? They were being cheered, they were being welcomed. So this wasn't exactly the social solidarity that Putin claimed yesterday. So very confused, very complex. Who knows what's going to happen next? But overall, it's been a bad 72 hours for Vladimir Putin.
It certainly has. And many people saying, if not the end, it's the beginning of the end. But of course, the concern seems to be, and I suppose it was echoed by the Foreign Secretary James Cleverly in a statement to the House of Commons yesterday, that the UK is preparing for all scenarios, you know, in terms of Putin staying in power, being ousted from power, who replaces him, if anyone in particular, a civil war, military coup, who knows what. There doesn't appear to be a single good scenario for the West, anyway.
I kind of agree with that. I wish I didn't. But if Putin were to fall, and it's way, way too early to imagine this is going to lead to his disappearance. But if he were to fall, the chances are he would be replaced by someone as bad, or if this is conceivable, worse than him. So we shouldn't think this is suddenly going to be a kind of Russian Spring. We're going to see an outbreak of democracy and sanity in that.
Yeah, and anyway, how did the Arab Spring work out anyway for most countries?
Fair point. That's a fair point. Yeah. So, you know, very, very complicated, but you know, something is going on in Russia, and this could well be just the start of something that runs on for some time.
And we're often told, aren't we, that actually, you know, Vladimir Putin is very popular in Russia, although there's this massive control of the state media and in the internet, and, you know, and pretty much everybody. He's siphoning money off and has immense power, and we know he's absolutely ruthless with any opposition leadership, that actually he's very popular. But of course, if you're popular, you don't need to control all those institutions, and you don't need to imprison any putative opposition leader, because you're sure of your power. But how much support support does Vladimir Putin have? We know that he helped build up the Wagner Group under Prigozhin because he wanted to make sure he basically had a private mercenary army that would basically step in the event of any sort of military coup by the Russian military. But then also you've got this idea that, you know, if the army didn't act at all as Prigozhin led the Wagner troops from Ukraine up, and they were only 2 hours away from Moscow, meeting barely any resistance at all, does he have any real support other than everyone paying lip service to the man currently in charge? And the moment it looks like he's toppling, that's all gone. It all disappears.
Yeah. It's first of all, it's a very weird thing in a way to have a sort of endorsed by the president private mercenary army out there, not just in Ukraine, by the way, but deployed across Africa and even as far away as Venezuela at times. There have been Wagner fighters in those countries. And it suddenly appears to turn on at least the defense ministry, the head of the armed forces and the defense minister, if not on Putin himself. And only in Russia would you think could this sort of stuff be going on. How popular is Putin? Look, it's impossible to know because he's not exactly putting himself up for a genuine open election every few years. I think there is a part of that vastness of Russia and the Russian psyche that likes strongman leaders. So I'm sure he does have a measure of support. But people don't like the way this war in Ukraine is going. It was expected to be a 2 or 3 week campaign and then the Russians parading in triumph in Kyiv. It's not been like that. And this is every day is a humiliation for the Russian armed forces, and a lot of Russian people must feel humiliated as well.
Well, indeed, President Zelensky, in his nightly address to the people of Ukraine and indeed the world, he's basically, saying it's been a happy day. He's visited forces on the front line. He's claiming that Ukraine is making advances, and that was the one hope, really, is that basic chaos in Russia would mean that a chance for the Ukrainians to mount a more rigorous counteroffensive, gain back more territory. But of course, the big fear now is that Vladimir Putin is going to have to sort of double down and perhaps a more brutal assault on the Ukrainians, even than we've already seen, even without the Wagner troops, to show he's the man in charge.
There is that fear, Julia, and we will see whether it happens. But I'd say two things. One, the Ukrainian counteroffensive is making some progress. Now, it's very slow progress, but I think military experts would say to you that's to be expected because there were 3 lines of fortifications put up by the Russians. And the first line includes these vast minefields, which you basically have to pick your way through, and that takes a lot of time. So don't, give up on or rule out Ukrainian military success yet. People will expect it, people who know expect it to take a long time. But, the other question is, are the Russian forces there clearly unhappy with their political leadership? Are they going to fight when the Ukrainians get close to where they are? And are there actually the reinforcements in Russia if things go badly there? And these are unknown questions. So watch this space.
You were a former national security advisor to David Cameron when he was Prime Minister. If you were his advisor right now, of course, you no longer have access to all these documents and what's being advised by intelligence services behind the scenes. What would your advice be about what Britain and the West should do now?
I'd say, one, don't give any ammunition or any hint that there was any Western involvement in what has gone on with the Wagner Group and Putin and the current disarray in Moscow. This is made in Moscow, this is made in Russia, and it must continue to look like that. Second, we have to continue to support the Ukrainian forces, and because this is going to take a long time, and we don't know how successful they will be, that means not just a great burst of help right at the beginning and then see how they go. It means sustained help, particularly with ammunition and shells and missiles. And of course, when the F-16s get there, that can make a difference.
Indeed. Thank you so much. Really appreciate you joining us. Lord Darroch, former National Security Advisor and former Ambassador to Washington as well. 8:18 is the time.